Okay, I'm not going to waste any time saying this. The Emisar D4SV2 is a fantastic flashlight, and in my opinion, it's currently the best light made by Hank Wang, the owner of this brand, which is highly regarded by enthusiasts. Generally, Hank's lights are known to be hot rods, which prioritize the fun factor, rather than pretending to be hard-use tools. The D4SV2 manages to provide tons of power, fun, and value, while also being a very useful and practical option. Between its great design, performance, and features, this is more than just a toy, and I highly recommend it to anyone seriously interested in flashlights. The D4SV2 is essentially an upscaled version of the very popular D4V2. Running off a powerful 26650 battery, it's bigger, with throwier optics, more thermal mass, and twice as many auxiliary emitters. A quad emitter hot rod with the Anduril firmware, it boasts the same extremely high output and near endless customizability of the D4, with myriad options and features that make it a must-own for flashlight enthusiasts. All of this comes at a starting price of just $60, and in my honest opinion, more so than any other light of this type, it makes a strong case for itself as a genuinely practical tool for conquering the dark. Like other Emisars, the D4SV2 is targeted squarely towards enthusiasts and is available in many different variants, with different features and functionality. For this review, I have here three versions: two dual-channel lights, one in a tint-ramping configuration and another with a dual beam setup, and one traditional single-channel light. These lights more or less cover the range of functionality provided by the current D4S models. As always, there's loads of customization that can be done when ordering these lights. This cyan-colored D4S carries the older FET+3+1 driver, a beefed-up version of the standard driver found in the smaller D4 that offers a higher regulated current. This light has four Osram CSLPM1 or W2 LEDs, which are extremely bright and throw very far. This really is the classic hot rod style flashlight for which Emisar has become synonymous, and is designed for maximum output and fun factor. The other two lights are quite a bit fancier, featuring the relatively new dual-channel constant current linear driver, which trades the power of the standard model for greater versatility. It is essentially two different flashlights in one, and can be configured any number of ways for the desired functionality. This first light has two floody Cree LEDs and two tight throwy Osram LEDs, and allows for switching between two different beam types in use. This other light has two pairs of Nichia 219B LEDs in different color temperatures, making for a light that can ramp between warm and neutral white. Now, I will clarify here, these lights were sent to me free of charge for review, two from Hank himself and one from the retailer Jackson Lee. I was not paid for this review, and I absolutely am biased because I love Hank's lights, and I think you should buy a couple, so bear that in mind. Let's go over the most interesting part first, output and performance. Like its smaller siblings, the D4SV2 is a quad with a FET-equipped driver that achieves extremely high outputs on turbo. Unlike those smaller lights, the larger host has greater thermal mass to allow for higher sustained output, while the larger cell can provide a higher constant discharge current. Thus, in practice, there are a few more lumens to be squeezed out of the light, and it will hold more output for a longer period of time. The FET allows for the cell to directly drive the main LEDs on turbo. This is a really great match for the W2s, as they are both very efficient and have a super high maximum output. With a powerful enough cell, this light can produce just over 6,000 lumens on turbo. Even a lower powered cell, such as this 15 amp battery, will still produce a very impressive 5,300 lumens, which is pretty amazing at night. Close behind is the W1 XPL light with a maximum of 4,500 lumens on turbo, which is visually very comparable. Well below that is the 219B model with a relatively modest 2,000 lumens. Actually, very good for these LEDs. These lights are limited to the combined maximum regulated level of their respective 18 amp and 10 amp drivers. Using a cell without enough discharge won't net you as much output, but a cell which can exceed the max regulated level won't gain you anything. Naturally, these lights run very hot, and output will drop rapidly on turbo. The W2 light in particular sees a steep decline over the first 25 seconds of its run, and drops from 6,000 to 500 lumens before leveling off at 1,000 lumens after 1 minute. The other two lights see a much more gradual fall from their maximum outputs. Running from turbo all the way down to moonlight takes around 4 hours with the larger 5 amp cell, and about an hour less with the stronger but lower capacity battery. This light does not have a higher maximum output than the smaller D4, and turbo still drops very rapidly. More importantly, however, the greater thermal mass does allow for a substantially higher sustained output. The W2 light was able to hold from 550 to 600 lumens throughout the run, while the W1 XPL light actually held a slightly higher output topping out close to 700 lumens towards the end of the run. Meanwhile, the Nichia light managed to sustain over 400 lumens for the entire run, which is very respectable. Because these drivers are not especially efficient, runtimes are just decent, being extended mostly by virtue of the large capacity offered by the batteries. In particular, the large 5500 mAh key power cell powers the more efficient lights for over 4 hours. The lower capacity but higher powered vape cell 26650 ran for about an hour less, while the small short battery only ran for about 90 minutes. It is important to note that these runtimes aren't really comparable to the smaller quads, as the sustained level is much higher, which will drain the battery faster. As far as real-world use is concerned at least, this is pretty solid. The standard light uses what is called a FET plus 3+1 driver, which uses 3 7135 chips to provide regulated output up to around 1 amp. Above this level, the FET adds some extra juice and is controlled via PWM to obtain the desired output. This means that while the driver is very efficient on the lower levels, it takes a big hit to efficiency once it exceeds the regulated portion of the ramp. The good news is that the regulated current is much higher than the smaller D4, and the regulated portion of the driver actually covers most of the useful levels in the ramp. The +1 part of the name refers to one extra regulator that handles the lowest output modes for efficient and stable moonlight use. Meanwhile, the dual channel light has 2 independent linear drivers, one for each channel, which are fully regulated throughout their range. This is the same linear driver architecture found in other Hank lights, with the same quirks as well. Namely, the lowest modes are very low, but are a bit unstable. The driver does get to take advantage of Toykeeper's latest firmware update that adds some extra granularity into the ramp. There's actually a FET physically present on channel 1 of this driver, but I do not recommend activating it, as only 2 LEDs are wired to use it and would almost certainly be burned out upon its activation. So just be mindful of what you're doing should you reflash one of these lights with different firmware. When ordering these lights, they will be configured with the appropriate maximum current level for the selected LEDs, so you won't have to worry about LED compatibility when purchasing. Okay, quick addition here. It is possible to custom order the single channel light with the linear driver, which should be the same as the DT8, with 9 amps of regulated current and a FET for turbo. It also has an illuminated switch and comes with Anduril too. Jackson Lee's store is now actually stocking these if you want one. The FET plus 3 is great, but I generally prefer the fully regulated drivers, so I'd probably go for this version instead if I were buying now. Either way though, it won't be a huge difference. They're both really good. Again, neither driver is particularly efficient, but considering the price and their actual real-world usability, I don't think this is an issue. I'm very happy to see the higher regulated output on the 3+1 driver, as between that and the throwier beam profile of the D4S, I find it to be a very practical light that doesn't need to be pushed super hard for actual usage. It certainly bears mentioning that these lights have the same, now semi-standard flashing pad layout as other Emisars, allowing for the driver to be reflashed with different firmware by the user. This is not only awesome for allowing the user to keep their light up to date with all the latest features, but also because it grants easy control over the driver for those more technically inclined. I'm a huge fan of this feature, and I think every light should have these flashing pads. While I really like 26650 batteries, I believe the biggest advantage to the wider diameter of this light is the larger optic that has been fit into the head as a result. With its quad LED LTIR optic, the D4SV2 produces a surprisingly tight and very clean beam, which is excellent for outdoor usage. The exact beam pattern will of course depend on the emitters, and in some configurations this light can be quite an impressive thrower. The Osram emitters in particular produce a very tight, intense beam. On the other end of the spectrum are these Cree XPL-HDs, with an intensity of less than 7 candela per lumen, even under these optics. This provides a really nice, floody beam pattern that illuminates a large area. By contrast, the pair of W1 emitters on the second channel of this light are extremely tight, with an impressive intensity of 36 candela per lumen. On turbo, this will provide an intensity of over 49,000 candela. The W2 emitters are much less intense than the W1s at 17 candela per lumen. The beam is quite a bit wider, but because the output is much greater on turbo, this light produces a beam with over 100,000 candela at its peak. This is a very impressive showing and provides a really awesome beam of light with a ton of throw. Bear in mind, however, that at normal sustained output levels, the W1s will still throw further due to their higher intensity. The W1s also cannot handle as high a current as the W2, so for these reasons I think the W1s are better in a dual channel light, while the W2 are superior for single channel lights. Both of the Osrams are very cool white and low CRI. With only 2 tiny dies under this optic, the W1s produce a pretty ugly beam in my opinion, with noticeable tint shift and irregularities. At 6000K, I really would only use this beam for long distance duties, as it's just not very pleasant for most usage. On the other hand, the W2s have a much nicer beam, a pure white 5700K or so, with a neutral tint and no noticeable color shift, which makes it perfectly usable for most tasks. However, I can't say how much of this is due to one light only using 2 rather than 4 LEDs. But either way, I do prefer the beam of the W2. The beam quality of the XPL-HDs isn't great. It's around 5000K, but there is significant tint shift, with the hot spot being very green and warm, and the spill being cooler and magenta tinted. I think a better option for this channel would have been the Samsung LH351D, which is a similarly floody LED that has a wider range of color choices and is somewhat high CRI. That configuration would not be quite as bright though, and I do still like the crease here as a very floody option. If a nice beam is what you're after, then the Nichia 219B is probably the best option. These LEDs are highly regarded by many enthusiasts for their pleasant beam and excellent color rendering. They trade some throw and a lot of output for a really beautiful, clean, high CRI beam that has a rosy tint. It has an intensity of 7.5 candela per lumen with a general use beam pattern that will comfortably work in most scenarios. The relatively low turbo of about 2000 lumens provides a maximum intensity of around 15,000 candela, which is enough for general use, but this is definitely a close to mid-range flashlight. This particular dual channel light has a combination of warm white and neutral white LEDs, which can be ramped to the desired temperature. Because both channels have such rosy beams, I do think that the center of the ramp is just a little too pink for my liking. It is a bit unnatural looking. This is just a result of mixing 2 different CCTs. Any tint ramping light will be rosier at its midpoint than at its endpoints. Whether this is good or bad is really just a matter of preference, and many people intentionally order mixes of different LEDs to get a more desirable, more magenta shifted tint. I've seen some combos with Osram W1s and Nichia 219Bs, and I think that might be the best combination to get if you're looking to have both performance and color rendering in one package. So I usually address the build of a light first, but there's not really much new here. It's basically just a fatter D4V2. As expected, build quality is excellent, with super smooth, precise threads, clean, even anodizing, and awesome knurling that feels great to hold. The light can be spec'd with a very strong magnet in the tail cap, and there is the option for a stainless steel bezel if preferred, which I do recommend as these lights aren't known to be especially durable. The battery tube is identical to the D4s, but for its fatter 26mm diameter. This thicker tube makes for a light which fits very nicely into the hand, and I really like this form factor. It's just about perfect for a light that is easily carryable, yet very powerful. 26650 is one of my favorite flashlight types, not only as there are many capable cells readily available on the market, but also because the tube allows for 18650s to be used just as easily, which can make for an excellent backup or lightweight option. If you wanted, you could run this on, say, a Samsung 30Q, and it would still be better than the D4V2 in my opinion, so having that ability is really cool. As alluded to in the runtime section, there are 2 extra battery tubes available for the D4S. The short 26350 tube is very fun, I quite like using it, but I don't see a real practical use for it as runtimes are low, and the light isn't exactly more portable this way. On the other hand is the large tube for 26800 cells, which has been very popular recently. I'm not really going to cover performance in this video as I only just received my 26800, but its very high capacity makes for long run times, and the extra length makes for a really excellent form factor. With this extra tube and cell, the D4SV2 can actually be a very practical and functional light for extended use, and I think this tube will be a major selling point for some. However, right now the 26800 cells are scarce enough to make this kind of a hardcore enthusiast option, and I'll probably give it its own dedicated video later. There are a few different colors available, and honestly I think this is a really good looking light, probably the best Hank has produced. In particular, I really like this green color. It's very pretty when matched with the white switch cover. The standard D4SV2 has a black switch, while the linear driver variant comes with an illuminated side switch with various color options. The E-switch is very responsive and is great to use, though the switch on my cyan light has a very different feel than the linear driver lights. It's less clicky and has a shorter travel. All of them feel great, but there is some variance there. It does bother me that the tail caps do not line up with the head, which is particularly annoying on the cyan light. It's just a result of the manufacturing process, as Hank orders the parts from manufacturers and assembles them kind of like Legos. I've noticed there's some variation in the threading as well. It's very subtle, but some tube and tail cap combos are tighter than others. This won't affect performance at all, but it's definitely not a custom light in terms of build quality. Still, for what it is, I think it's very good. The D4SV2 runs the Anduril interface, which is well loved in the enthusiast community, and for good reason. There's not really anything new here, but I'm always happy to praise this interface because it's so feature-rich and customizable, yet is very easy to use, at least in my opinion. This light does feature the standard Emisar flashing pad layout, allowing for updates and custom firmware to be loaded onto the driver. In my case, this was rather important, as unfortunately my lights did not come with the latest firmware installed. In fact, my W2 light came with a very old Anduril 1 version, while the other two ran Anduril 2. I have updated all of my lights to the latest version, which offers some really cool new features. As always, Anduril is very much an enthusiast-oriented interface, and it's not one I would recommend to the average user. It's pretty much in keeping with the rest of this light, which is really not intended for the casual flashlight buyer, but who am I kidding? If you're watching this video and you've gotten this far, you're already well aware of that. Of course, the D4SV2 has auxiliary lights, this time twice as many as the smaller lights, with a total of 16 RGB LEDs arrayed under the optic. Other than the greater number, nothing here is really different than before. I am a huge fan of these auxiliary emitters, and as good as the D4S already is, these really put it over the top for me. The Aux Lights just add so much extra utility and style to the light. But yeah, nothing new here really. So, like the D4V2, the D4SV2 is very popular in the flashlight community, and I think this reputation is very well deserved. In fact, I like the D4S much more than the smaller D4, and while I definitely would not recommend it to the average buyer who just needs a flashlight, I think anyone seriously into hobbyist lights like these should own one, or multiple. It offers everything a hobbyist on a budget could want, and it does so while being very practical and useful. Really, what more could you ask for? Between the higher sustained output, better efficiency with standard drivers, greater throw, and larger batteries, I really think the D4SV2 is more viable as a real tool than any other Hank light I have yet used. The D4SV2 starts at $59 and goes up from there depending on the options, topping out somewhere around $90. I think it presents excellent value at that price, and I have no reservations recommending it to anyone seriously interested in flashlights. You can of course buy these from internationaloutdoor.com, where they can be customized as desired. If you want quicker shipping, Jackson Lee at jlhawaii808.com has several in stock as well. Granted, they both sent lights to me, so I am biased, but both have been a pleasure to work with, so I'm happy to vouch for either retailer. As for which of these is my favorite, it's really tough to decide. Ultimately, I think the Nichia 219B model takes the cake for me with its beautiful high CRI beam and awesome tint ramping feature, which kind of makes it the ultimate light for flashlight nerds in my opinion. It's just so cool and I love using it. While it doesn't have the same incredible output as the others, it still provides as much utility as I need, so there's nothing to complain about. That said, for performance you can't beat the W2 model. This thing is awesome, it's just so stupid bright and has tons of reach, making it super fun to use at night. Using it feels kind of like wielding some sort of legendary blade of light. Honestly, the beam color is good enough that I'm happy recommending this as a primary light for outdoor use. It's excellent overall, and I think a lot of people would be extremely happy with it. The dual beam light is somewhat of a different beast altogether. It's beyond the scope of this video to debate the merits of single versus dual channel, but honestly I don't think it makes that much of a difference in real world use. Having the ability to switch from flood to throw is super nice, I really do like it, but I feel there's no major advantage to this system when something like the W2 realistically covers both needs well enough. That said, it's really up to you and what you want. It's worth trying out at least. I mean, this is an enthusiast light, it's supposed to be whatever you want it to be, right? Between the W1s and the XPLs, this particular dual channel light just doesn't have the nicest beam, but I think that is offset by the utility it offers with its two totally different beam types. This is just what Hank sent me, and I think it's a pretty good setup for performance, but I would have opted for the Samsung emitters on channel 1. Again, I probably would just get the single channel light for practicality, but if I had to get just one D4S, I think I would go with the W1 219B mix. Whatever you do, you really can't go wrong. However, you will almost certainly find yourself wondering what the other combinations might look like, and if you're not careful, you could find yourself knee-deep in Emisar flashlights, so just be careful. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I tried to keep it a bit shorter since most of the technical stuff has already been covered in previous videos. I just wanted to highlight what was unique about this light, and just wanted to show why I liked it so much. If you have any questions, you can feel free to leave them in the comments below, or even better, you can look to the subreddits r/flashlight and r/Hank Lights for answers from enthusiasts with more experience and knowledge. You can also look to budgetlightforum.com for more cool technical info. I'll link everything relevant down below. So I would like to thank both Hank and Jackson for sending me these lights. I would also like to thank Toykeeper for her work on Anduril and for answering my questions on all of this stuff. Most of all, I'd like to thank you, the viewer, for your time and support. It is really appreciated. And with that, I hope you have an excellent, wonderful, fantastic rest of your day.